Great. Well, I just want to introduce you to Mitch Parker from the Temple Health System for now. And thank you so much for being here. I'll let you tell everybody where you're going.
It's already in the PowerPoint. Okay. So thank you all very much for being here today. The purpose of today is to discuss the network engineering and regulatory requirements that we need to successfully implement medical devices in a clinical engineering environment. So a little bit of background about myself. I've been the CISO of Temple Health for about 8 years, and as of September 12th, we'll be moving on to be the new Executive Director of Information Security and Compliance at Indiana University Health in beautiful Indianapolis, Indiana. So I'll be joining Rebecca out in the beautiful Midwest. So what's my background? I've implemented multiple clinical engineering solutions, everything from radiology systems over to OB TraceView to a number of products from pretty much every major vendor out there. I was the technical lead on most of those projects. And I've worked with multiple vendors to improve and standardize their security because of it. Because quite frankly, we have a lot of challenges. Let's get to those challenges. So what are we looking for? First thing we're looking for is a reference architecture that actually maps to real-world environments. Because quite frankly, what I've been seeing out there in terms of when we get medical devices delivered have been devices that they work in an ideal environment, not what I would consider real worlds. We want to set expectations for maintenance and management because one of the other big items that we've seen is that resource allocation for anything involving clinical device maintenance has actually been a very large issue because it's never really been communicated. And we want to make sure we have upgrade paths using current platforms and the ability to monitor what we have for alarms and issues, which has been another issue because either you have nothing or you have alarm fatigue. So this is something that's being addressed on both the software engineering and clinical side. And next, move on to good communication on vulnerability management. Because one of the other big items we've noticed has been with vulnerability disclosures. We really have seen a wide variety of vulnerability disclosures, and a lot of what's gone on in the past couple of years, realistically, the variety's been a little bit too much for us to be able to handle. And we want to make sure there's proactive processes, and finally, documented design processes using industry-standard algorithms for encryption, because again, that's something else where, again, we've seen wide variety, but we like to see less variety. And we want to see privacy and security in the whole development process, not just at the end. And I've been talking a lot about this the past week in my class at Temple University. So what are we trying to avoid? Number one, data breaches. I like Nicholas very much. I don't like getting the 13-step list of items that OCR wants when there's a data breach. We've been audited twice in the past 3 years at Temple, and one of them was a data breach. And I will tell you that list of 13 items will put fear in the hearts of most people. We don't want to have triple networks because, again, quite honestly, we have had to shoehorn biomed devices on the network, and sometimes that's had to compromise our security. And cascading failures. This is something that we cannot talk enough about. And what I mean by cascading failures has multiple aspects. Number one, you have a clinical application or device in a certain application version or software version. You can't update other clinical applications because of it. So because you have this one device out there, you can't update everything cascading down the road, leading to a cascading failure. You have clinical applications that haven't been updated to work with newer web browsers. Right now, we've seen a lot of that with Internet Explorer 11. So just to let everyone know, earlier this year, Microsoft decided that they were going to drop support for every web browser except Internet Explorer 11. A huge amount of clinical engineering applications do not work with older versions of IE. Do not work with newer versions of IE. They work with older ones. So that's been a challenge for a number of vendors trying to get this to work. And Microsoft's been heavily engaged as well. In addition, Internet Explorer itself is end of life. And they're trying to push in Microsoft Edge. And people to backfill are using Chrome, Firefox, and pretty much everything else you can think of. Which means that sometimes you have applications out there that are designed for IE6 or IE7. And not exactly working too well on IE11, Edge, or Chrome. And also, you're not able to upgrade or patch your operating environments due to older clinical engineering applications, and you're also unable to upgrade your platforms. You have some items out there, you have some applications out there that still need Windows XP. I will tell you, we did a vendor review of a certain very large manufacturer, and I got their MDS2 form. I called the person up at the company whose name was on that form. I said, do you understand that device runs Windows XP and that there is no way we are going to allow that onto our network? They said, we understand that. I said, do you have any plans for an upgrade? No. So you have a lot of companies that think because they're billion-plus-dollar companies, they can get away with Windows XP. It's still out there. So we also live in a world of complexity. Number one, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand, the effect of guest wireless. We provide guest wireless to our patients. I can tell you, and I see Rebecca smiling over here, a number of clinical engineering devices also use guest wireless. We are well aware of that. We have multiple network management devices we have to contend with these days. I can tell you of at least one clinical research study we had, in particular, because I had a Procera sitting between my network and a major research university in Boston's. We had transmission of data between those two broken. And we had product support for the product we were using engaged. Found out later, a network engineer made a setting on a Procera device and that pretty much broke every piece of communication. You have virtualization, software-defined networking, firewalls, intrusion detection and intrusion prevention, security information and event management, electronic medical records, and most importantly, the main business driving factor behind why we're seeing all these consumer electronic devices being used, people want to monetize their EMR systems. I can tell you a conversation I had with a hospital CEO a few weeks ago where he was interviewing for another job before he got the one he had, and the CIO of a major academic medical center went to him and said, can you make money with MyChart? MyChart being the consumer-focused portal for Epic. So there is a push to monetize electronic medical record systems, I think partially to offset the Epic cost of some of these systems. So what are we looking for? Reference implementation architectures that reflect the real world. So we want to hear from the vendors. What are your recommendations for network segmentation implementation for your device? What are your firewall rules? In other words, how can we put this on our network and put it off with its own little walled garden so that we can protect it from the rest of the real world? Because the real world in the hospital is kind of rough. And I've had these talks with some of the largest vendors out there, including some that really do bring good things to life. We want good wireless security support. One of the other big items we've seen is a lot of vendors out there still don't support WPA2 Enterprise. WPA2 Enterprise actually uses AES encryption to protect data in transit, specifically authentication data. It's been around for a number of years. Apple was supporting this 13 years ago on the Power Macs. You can make it work on newer devices. So we would like to see that. And rules for network access control devices. So one of the big things that's been happening, especially out here in the East Coast, is a lot of network access control vendors have been putting their devices in. And what we'd like to see is a lot of the biomed devices, clinical engineering devices, working with them. I can tell you Forescout, in particular, has made a significant inroad in the state of New Jersey. We want collaboration. So what else are we looking for? Virtualization. We want you to support VMware, and we want support for network virtualization. VMware is having a push to pretty much virtualize your entire data center, and we'd like to see full support for that. And we want collaboration with the infrastructure vendors. We actually have spoken with VMware. I've spoken with people in the NSX team at VMware. They are willing to work with third-party vendors to get their stuff working, because every device you have working with VMware is another sale for them. And it's another sale that the competition's not going to get. We want to see working with other vendors, such as network access control manufacturers, firewall vendors, etc. We want to know that you've actually worked with these people. And here's the killer one. Antivirus and anti-malware vendors. What we have actually noticed is that a lot of medical devices out there, we're talking lab testing equipment I've personally seen, other sorts of equipment, even radiology. Everyone's scared to put antivirus or anti-malware software on their devices because they think it's going to break. I can tell you there's been a few vendors that have warmed up to it, but this is still a problem. And a lot of health systems are afraid to test antivirus because they're afraid antivirus is going to break the device. So we want to make sure that you're working with antivirus. And C, we want to know when something is wrong and what to look for. It's about the data. So what else are we looking for? Secure by default configurations. So I bring up the example of Capsule from Qualcomm Life. They actually ship a reasonably secure device that we can put on our network. And it's actually secured by default. And we want the minimum necessary information to operate and document it. And I shouldn't have to ask you repeatedly. In other words, I do purchasing reviews. Right now, it takes me about 3 or 4 phone calls on average to get out of a major company all the information I need to get for minimum necessary operation of the device, period. I don't need to make 3 or 4 phone calls. The salespeople should be giving it to me along with the quote. You're good about the quote, you're not so good about the information what we really need. And unique passwords for a device or group of devices. There's one other thing I'm well aware of. I can Google and find most medical device passwords, and I've done it. I've actually had 1 or 2 cases where I've actually had to get into a device and even know the default password, I Googled. I got in. And support for enterprise authentication. This is something I'm not seeing enough of these days. We want to see Active Directory support, Kerberos support, potentially 2-factor authentication. One vendor in particular I spent a lot of time with, I actually tell them, you need to use something with 2-factor authentication if you're going to be supporting this, if you're going to be supporting this device. If you're going to be supporting this in my health system. So they're working on it. It's always what we hear. What are our goals? We want support out of the box for our networks and security. We want support for a high variety of infrastructure because we're not just going to have the ideal walled garden network anymore. You're putting stuff on heavily virtualized networks and everything is changing. And the whole paradigm of cloud puts a whole new perspective on it. And there's a whole lot of new infrastructure. And more importantly, we want it planned right the first time. We want our implementations to be quick, painless, and planned, which is not what I've gotten so far. And we want it done the right first time. We want the guesswork reduced. And we want the tools we need to enforce minimum necessary. And I can't talk enough about this with minimum necessary. A lot of devices out there, don't even have usernames and passwords. We are more concerned about the data going to and from the device because, again, I talk about the monetization of EMR systems. Everything we plug into a network these days, I assume that data is going to some sort of EMR system, period. Therefore, I want minimum necessary going to the EMR. And I want minimum necessary coming back from the EMR to the device. And that's something that we'll talk about later in this presentation. And we want to keep the implementation engineers active. I can't tell you how much they've been sitting idle. I'll tell you why. Because we want to avoid hacks to make the equipment work. Devices that don't get delivered to us in a secure state, i.e. you got to do security work when your implementation engineer is on site actually putting it in, and I get the frantic phone call, and the lack of planning that we've seen in part of the implementation engineers. So in other words, we don't want to delay our customers. We want these devices on the network quickly, and we don't want the engineers blaming security when realistically it's poor planning because I don't want to get that phone call that, quote unquote, you put a CT scanner in and why can't it talk back because the firewall rules aren't there. Well, InfoSec didn't know what the firewall rules were. It's a big problem we have. Tell us what they are. Give it to us in advance. Let us stage it. Let us put it through change management, and we'll get it out there for you. And we want to improve the security in clinical engineering by emphasizing planning and change management. One of the biggest challenges I've had in the past 8 years has been getting that phone call. Usually from an implementation engineer saying, oh, we didn't give you this information, but we got a firewall change? I'll give you a hint. When you've got 11,000 employees, over 20,000 combined end user devices, and a small network engineering staff, you have to plan and stage out and test every firewall change you make, because if you don't, I put those people out of work, and I put a lot of patients not able to get care. So we really do ask for that. And we often get devices delivered that they have manuals attached, but no expectation how we're to maintain them. And they need to be maintained properly in order to stay safe and secure. This is a HIPAA and high-tech requirement. You have to mitigate risks to your devices, period. I mean, it comes right out and says it. I mean, I can't tell you the 45 CFR 164.306 section, but the fact that I can tell you that much lets me know that I can quote it to our executives and say, you need to budget for this. And we also have joint commission requirements. I'm surprised I didn't hear that. When it comes to hospitals, we have joint commission requirements for disaster recovery and business continuity. And what happens when you don't have a network? So we have to plan for everything. And sometimes that includes manual operating a device, knowing how the device operates, so that you can write how to use this device if the network's not there, so people know how to use it to take care of a patient. And it also comes down to budgeting issues. Hospitals are low margin. According to the American Hospital Association in 2012, about a quarter of the hospitals in the United States have negative operating margins. That means they lose a lot of money. And this is even combined with the fact that the United States government and state governments give our hospitals millions of dollars every year. They still lose money. And correspondingly, there's been an increase in the age of physical plant. We think about 20% from the statistics I've read in the past 10 years. So when you think about it, poor planning and unexpected maintenance, they take the money out of the capital and operating pools that are meant for patient care projects. So we look at this as a patient care issue because when I devote money to fixing an issue with a biomed device, that money is coming from elsewhere. And oftentimes it comes from patient care. And what happens? We can't maintain these devices properly due to insufficient staff or monies allocated. And a lot of these biomed or clinical engineering applications and devices are unmaintained because of the lack of resources or funds. And eventually we end up with obsolete operating systems and application software, and that's chock full of vulnerabilities we can't fix because the business case was not designed to handle the processes required for system maintenance, and we end up with systems that add risk, not value, to our organization. So what it comes down to is we've got to be more clear about our requirements. So what do we want? One of the things I worked on when I was developing our systems administration training program at Temple was operational plans. So we wanted to make sure that we had everything documented for actually maintaining a device. So we wanted it based on full-time employees for maintaining these systems to HIPAA and high-tech standards. So in other words, I broke it down for our executives, and I first presented to our practice plan daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. Combination of HIPAA, Joint Commission, and compliance program requirements with the expected allocation. So you knew what to expect and you knew what to allocate. So you bring a device in, you know how many people it's going to take to maintain the device to the expected level of compliance. Because we want to be at the point where we can demonstrate that we're actually making our best effort to be compliant. And periodic product update schedules, again, with FTE allocations. Reason for that? We want to have a commitment to keep the devices, applications, and environments up to date. We don't want to have something where, oh, by the way, we bought this software, we don't think we need to update it. We're not communicating to people, yeah, you kind of do. Because you're going to end up with Windows Server 2003 in your data center, and it's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars to upgrade all at once, as opposed to you spend $10,000 every other year, incrementally keep it up to date, as opposed to spending $50,000 at once. And we want operational budgets based on device. So what else do we want? Instructions how to maintain the system to HIPAA and high-tech standards. So we want to determine what rights does the user have on the device, and how to determine user activity and export it. I do investigations. Every time something happens where there's a potential breach, I get a phone call. Take a look at what this person did. Well, how? Number of times I've called help desks at the vendors. How do I look at what this person did? Because I've got to investigate this before my friends at the Office of Civil Rights come and start asking me a lot of questions, and I want to show that I've been reasonable and appropriate in what I'm looking for, and showing that I'm not throwing up my hands. We have to be precise. You know why? Because OCR is precise. I'd rather us be precise and show that we made a best effort, rather than have them go, well, you didn't know how to do this. Here's a six-figure fine. We want to be able to patch and maintain systems and devices, and integrate the data with a SIEM or a breach tracking system like Fair Warning, so we can be proactive and go, well, somebody went on this one device and looked at 1,000 patients yesterday. Maybe we should be taking a look at that. And there's a lot of startups in this space that are doing a lot of that work, and we want to be able to integrate with what they're doing and actually be able to have actionable information. Because we look at medical devices, and the fact that these devices now interface with an EMR system means that they have access to all of our data. And you can use that device to browse data a lot easier than it is to log into an EMR. What else do we want? Expected tasks for server maintenance. A lot of times now, and we actually get devices, they're packaged virtual machines. And I don't want to hear the words, it's just an appliance anymore. We need to be able to see what that device does and be able to determine success. What is success? Keeping the operating system current. In other words, you can't just give me an appliance anymore and say, it runs Linux. I'm a little bit smarter than that. I'll ask you what kind of Linux, how you update the Linux, how long you commit to putting updates out there for. What happens if there's a big Linux kernel vulnerability or a big library vulnerability like glibc? How are you going to maintain this? How are we going to keep this current without spending a lot of money? How do we keep the server-side applications current? And what alarms and events do we need to look for? So in other words, are there system health alarms? Are there storage alarms? Am I going to get a phone call from you going, oh, we didn't tell you this, but your virtual machine needs another 2 terabytes of storage. I got that phone call last year. What happens with processor usage? How do we monitor that? How do we monitor network performance? What do we look for? Give us the data we need to actually successfully implement your device or your virtual machine in our environment. The biggest thing I'm seeing, again, they give us a VM and tell us, here, have at it. Your tech services team needs to do nothing. As my 12th grade chemistry teacher would say, wrong. So we also want the expected tasks for server maintenance, such as patching, keeping the OS current, because again, with Linux, there's a new version of Ubuntu every 6 months. Number of the appliances out there are based on Ubuntu. Some are based on Fedora. Some are based on Red Hat. And I don't want to hear the excuse of, oh, we put this out every 3 years. Yeah, you have, but you're based on Fedora Linux 17. The current version is 20-something. When are you going to be on a current version of Fedora? Keep the server-side applications current. Again, this is just, I can't emphasize this enough. And we want a clear explanation of maintenance on the documents that the executives sign. Because here's the deal. I work in capital budgeting. Capital budgeting is where you get all the quotes, you take a look at the 5-year financial plan, and you make your decision based on a 5-year financial plan. So the executives only see the costs from your company. They don't see the expected maintenance costs. So they need to understand the capital costs, operating expenses, and maintenance and security costs. What's the expected security tail as opposed to the operational tail? And remember, they see that quote, and that's the price that goes up for budgeting. So if you don't include maintenance and security, you're just not getting budgeted for it. And the way most companies work, everything comes out of a pool, and not 100% of the items get funded in the pool. If you're at a company that gets 100% of their capital projects funded, congratulations. I've never, because that company doesn't exist. I was going to say, is a unicorn your CEO? So, vulnerability management. We want to be notified when your vendor product or a third-party component has a vulnerability. And we need to understand the criticality. We need to plan the patch. And this needs to be regular events. So I'll give you 3 key examples here. Microsoft has Patch Tuesday. Oracle has the quarterly patches. And High Touch EMR vendor, who I'm not going to name because I did a presentation for them, and when I got it back, it had actually an additional slide with, in 4-point type, every copyright that the vendor owns. Not going to name them. They actually customized to the customer's rollout plan. And based on what's our expectation? Based on the operational plans, a regular patch schedule. We want to regularly maintain these systems. And we want your definitions of what low, medium, high, and critical, which is what I use at Temple now, what are they? And if there's no patches needed on a regular schedule, just tell us no patch. Realistically, on the CISSP class that I teach, and on the exam, there's actually a question that talks about what should you notify someone if there's no security events. And you send them something that says no events, period. And if there's an emergency, you want to be notified immediately of what actions to take. We understand we're not going to immediately patch, but we want to mitigate it. Provide us with mitigation instructions. I get these all the time. High Touch EMR vendor, as I call them, I get a phone call from the Midwest telling me if there's a critical patch coming out and how to mitigate it. I actually get a phone call from the technical resource assigned to the clients. And they also plan out our update schedule. So I will actually have a phone conversation with the implementation engineer that's assigned at Temple, and we'll talk about, okay, this security patch is coming out. You have this upgrade plan for this part of this month, so we're going to build a security patch up there into there, and these are the mitigation steps we want you to take. So that's the conversation I have, which is something that is incredible to have, and we've only gotten this in the last year. And also, we want you to plan for change management. All of us in healthcare now have really had to adopt change management. We want you to package your vulnerability remediation steps into a planned package we can actually use. So we want to know the estimated times for installation, the estimated time for testing, and the estimated time for preparation and packaging so that we can actually budget our limited resources to do these patches. We don't want surprises to go, okay, this patch is a simple patch. No, it's going to take 6 hours. We learned that lesson from Microsoft with anything.net. You budget 45 minutes, no matter if Microsoft says 5 minutes or not. And assume we're going to send this to our change advisory board before it even goes out to the customers. Most of us have change advisory boards now. We actually talk about the changes. So we have to assume that we're going to have to defend and demonstrate the resource allocation as part of our change advisory board process, and more importantly, we have to justify the downtimes to our staff. I can be very specific when we had to move our emergency department information system about 6 years ago. I had one of our physicians in ED fighting me tooth and nail because I said 4 hours. We had to move the servers off of a bad network switch. My way of demonstrating it, I took the director of nursing for emergency services for Temple Hospital into our data center. I said, this is where your servers are now, this is where they're going. Any questions? We got our move. So why are we asking for all this? It comes down to vulnerabilities. We had our lawyers interpret the HITECH Act for us. And one of the things we found in HITECH was that if we cannot prove that an exploited software vulnerability has not potentially compromised records, all records are considered to be in breach. So we talked to a big law firm in Center City, Philadelphia. Our own lawyers provided explanations. So if we can't prove the negative, we assume everything's been breached. And we would prefer not to have a big breach, especially on my chart. And we're seeing a huge number of vulnerabilities in third-party libraries. The two biggest ones I'm going to give, OpenSSL and glibc under Linux. So pretty much Linux, just for the lay people that don't know what it is an operating system. It has two major components, the kernel and glibc. If you do not have either of those, you do not have a functional Linux operating system. And when one of those has a problem, you better patch it. We also want to make sure we have design process we want to talk about. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. One of the big things that we've seen has been with design processes that don't meet HIPAA or HITECH standards. I've actually talked to a number of software development teams, and I've talked a lot with Rebecca with this with regards to our working at EEE. A lot of software out there we can't assure meets standards for minimum necessary data transfer because we are required under HIPAA to make sure that people only are supposed to see what they need per task. So in other words, we consider it a violation if you show someone in registration a patient's entire record. They don't need to see it. They need to see what they need for registration, and that's it. So we want to make sure that the coding interfaces meet minimum necessary requirements, and we hammer people on this internally. We want to see use cases that prove minimum necessary. And we can't have extra data just to have it there. We had it out with our internal staff over extra data they may need. And in the words of my current CIO, no you don't. You need to see what you need to see. And we want to develop protection profiles based on data elements, protection used, and transmission methods. So we look at the whole picture. And the standard modeling and design process, such as waterfall, they don't take data, views, or privacy into account. However, UML does. Gives a lot of people here in Jersey who do financial services work a big thumbs up because it's used a lot in financials. And it can be used as and the reason why is because it associates data with use cases. I can show you my 75-page software engineering project from my first master's degree. And it actually had everything on there, my little CRC cards that talked about data and the actors that actually use those data elements. And object-oriented design also provides that as well. And UML is a good starting point to show how your data and processes interact. And it can be used to design your minimum views of data for people that need it. So we look at it at that level. And I titled this one DevOps, Agile, and Other Items We Cannot Use because, well, a lot of items we can't use. Because due to HIPAA and HITECH, we need to show documented processes that mitigate risk and show a good documented design. So we associate this with common criteria, we associate this with all the certification and accreditation, and I'm an ex-defense contractor, so we're really big on this with the documented design process. And while these two processes have good intentions, they don't work for programs that need to be audited, because the lack of documentation process kind of makes it hard to prove the negative with vulnerabilities to show that you've done your due diligence. However, there are two items we can use. My favorite being Apache Jenkins with continual integration, because it allows you to automate your entire build process, and it allows you to integrate better security support processes, biggest ones we can think of: static and dynamic code analysis. I have had talks with high-touch EMR vendor specifically about what they do in that regard, and I know they're doing it because I've talked to their CISO. And they've done a very good job with it. They've actually caught vulnerabilities and let us know before it got out in the wild. Integrated unit testing gets built in when you use Jenkins and you know how to use it, and so does vulnerability analysis. So in other words, you complete a build, you have an executable, kick off a scanner, run an SS scan on your executable. Very simple, and because it logs everything, you have log files of your entire process, and you make everything more auditable by using an automated process designed for something that's designed to be less auditable. And you combine it with good change management, code review, and a good issue tracking system, and you've got most of the way to being more compliant. And you build off. You get codes into the hands of the customers more quickly so they can test it. Because we want to help you test and resolve your issues. I don't want to wait 6 months for a new build. I'd like to have a new build next week, or preferably the same day, so I could load it up in our environment, test it, and go, yeah, this fixes it. Why? Because it gets better service delivery in the hands of our customers. And you know it's a big shift in methodology, how to also keep the build chain current. My experience is also for a couple of years I did build engineer work. And one of the most difficult tasks is after 3 years looking at a software bug, building a PC that can actually build the software. I can tell you in the IBM versus SCO case, that was actually something that IBM had a problem with, providing discovery for SCO when they were on their wild goose chase. They actually had to dedicate a number of engineers to pull data out of their old source code control systems and provide SCO environments where they could actually read that code. Keep in mind, they were asking for code from 25 years ago. That was almost impossible to provide, and I think IBM dedicated millions of dollars of resources to that. And brings us to standard libraries. We want to see more standard libraries for common functions such as encryption or security. When I started in this business as a CISO 8 years ago, we did a survey of all of our vendors to talk about authentication and how they protected passwords. I got a lot of answers for, we have our own proprietary encryption, which means NIST hasn't tested it. We would prefer to have something FIPS 140-2. Thank you. We want to be able to point to a standard algorithm, and we also think it makes it easier for you to issue security patches and releases when you're using standard libraries as opposed to rolling your own. Rolling your own gets very difficult. And also, we did our own reading into the Federal Register at Temple. One of the things we found is if you don't use standard encryption, and you use that encryption to protect PHI, and that PHI has been lost, I don't think that HHS considers it to be encrypted. And we don't want to have a breach because somebody decided to use their own encryption algorithm as opposed to AES. So what's our total goal? We want to see a better partnering between the vendors and the customers. And we want to work with you to improve our products. Believe me, the reason some of us hammer the vendors the way we do is because we want to work with you. And we want you to provide something better. And we want to make it easier to use and easier to maintain in a more secure fashion. So with that, I got the questions. Thank you.
We don't have time for questions, but we're going to say thank you.
Thank you very much.